She should return there tomorrow. What would you say if I asked you to follow her and then try to look inside and find out what's going on there?" Tom looked searchingly at Chuck, tensely waiting for his decision. "Yes, of course. I will do it for you, brother. But what if they're doing something you suspect they're doing somewhere other than the master bedroom?" "Damn, it's possible." Tom thought for a moment and then waved his hand. "Okay, then just do what you can and try not to get caught. Amy might recognize you, and then she'll know for sure that I sent you." "Okay, you're right. This time I'll dress to disguise myself and use my mother's minivan instead of my car. Plus, now we know where Amy's going and what time she'll be there, so I don't have to follow her everywhere. I'll wait for her there. Sorry, but I'm not very good at spying on cars, and it's possible that she saw me that last time," Chuck muttered apologetically. "She saw you? Holy crap, Chuck, why didn't you tell me about this when it happened?" Well, Chuck hesitated. "I still wasn't entirely sure that she recognized me. And besides, I was afraid that you would fire me. Sorry, brother, but I really needed money then." "Okay, to hell with it. Let's move on. Just be careful not to get caught this time, okay?" Tom asked insistently. Chuck promised to behave carefully, and the brothers soon separated. Tomorrow promised to be a very busy day for both of them. Chuck knew that Amy's visit was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next morning, so at 9:30 he turned onto the street 1 block from Brad Street. The night before, he had scouted the area and found a suitable entrance to the neighbor's backyard through the bushes that grew along the fence on the backside of Brad's house. He parked the minivan so that he could look between the two houses and see the door opening onto Brad's backyard. Chuck assumed that Brad would let his dog outside shortly before Amy arrived. Then, as soon as she appears, the dog will be too busy to notice him as he sneaks around the backyard. As Chuck had hoped, Brad's dog was in the yard when Amy arrived. Buster went crazy with barking. He rushed along the fence and jumped on the door. When Amy opened the patio door and let the dog in, the dog rushed towards her and began twirling and jumping around her with a cheerful bark. Chuck waited about 2 minutes and then, heart-pounding, darted across the lawn to the back corner of the house. After catching his breath against the wall, he crouched and slowly made his way to the bedroom window and swore under his breath when he saw that the blinds were down. Chuck knew there were 2 more windows on the side of the house, but he was afraid that if he moved there, he would probably be visible from the street if one of the neighbors happened to be there. While he stood pressed against the back wall of the house, not daring to lean out and with thoughts jumping around in his head like fleas on a dog, a neighbor on the far side of Brad's house let her dog out into the yard. The damn dog immediately noticed the stranger, rushed to the fence, and began barking loudly. Chuck had no choice. He walked around the corner of the house and slid along the wall to the first window. The blinds on this window were also closed, but, luckily for him, not completely. Chuck positioned the camera so that through the gap in the blinds he could see what was happening inside the bedroom and pressed record. He himself pressed his cheek against the wall of the house and froze, without moving, extending his outstretched hand with the phone towards the window. He was afraid that any movement he made might give him away. The self-proclaimed detective was filming blindly through a window because he couldn't risk leaning over to check what his phone camera was actually recording. Just in case, he slowly and carefully moved the camera around, desperately hoping that he managed to capture the entire room. Suddenly, he heard shuffling steps nearby and a quiet conversation in the morning silence, and his heart sank when he saw an elderly couple passing by along the path laid out in front of the house. Frozen as a statue, Chuck waited for several minutes, following the leisurely couple with widened eyes until they were finally out of sight. Only then did he take a breath, deciding not to tempt fate any longer, quickly looked around and, seeing no one, rushed headlong to the sidewalk, jumped over the fence, and headed up the street. The damned mongrel from the neighboring area barked angrily after him. Trying his best to twitch less and attract attention to himself, the Pinkerton cousin walked around the block and returned to the car he had left. He was still breathing heavily from the rush of adrenaline when he slumped into the driver's seat. But at the same time, he was filled with boyish joy and pride at a successful task. Throwing the phone on the passenger seat, Chuck pulled out a tissue from his pocket with his shaking hands and hastily wiped the sweat from his sweaty forehead and neck. "It's time to get out of here," he thought, after which he started the minivan and pulled out onto the road. Chuck was still driving towards his house when his cell phone rang. "Hello?" Tom's voice came through the earphone. "Did you see anything?" It was clear from his impatient tone that he had been waiting in suspense all morning for news. "Sorry, brother. I almost got set on fire there and I couldn't see anything," Chuck began apologetically. "However," he added, "I may have something on video from the room." "What do you mean by saying possible?" Tom began to fume. "Did you get the video or not?" Chuck briefly explained how his secret foray went, and then said, "I haven't watched the recording myself yet, and I don't know whether there's something there for us or not. I'm still driving towards home." "Wait, don't come home," Tom suggested, burning with impatience. "Come to my work, and we'll watch the video in my office. I'll call the front desk and let them know about you, and they'll take you upstairs." 15 minutes later, Chuck appeared and handed his brother a camera, and Tom connected it to his personal laptop. The video began with a shot of the side of a bed. Then at the very top of the frame, human knees and shins periodically flashed, but nothing more. After a few moments, the camera moved slightly, and now only the lower side of the bed was visible. Tom literally groaned in disappointment and annoyance, slamming his hand on the table. "This is completely useless. You can't see a damn thing here." However, just as he finished his frustrated tirade, the image suddenly shifted again, and two bodies flashed into the frame as the camera panned up, stopping at the sight of a ceiling fan above the bed. "Stop! What was it? Can we go back and maybe freeze frame it?" Tom exclaimed excitedly, reaching for the laptop's built-in keyboard. "Wait!" Chuck grabbed his hand. "Just wait a second." The camera shook again and went down, moving from showing the ceiling to the bed. And then Tom exhaled the air from his lungs in shock, hissing in a deadened voice, "Bitch!" The camera was focused on the couple having sex. Brad gripped the woman's hips tightly, and an expression of bliss walked across his face, glistening with sweat. After a few seconds, Amy, jerking back and forth, turned her face, eyes half-lidded, directly towards the camera. Tom's old world collapsed in an instant and crumbled into 1,000 pieces. He sat dumbly, hunched over, and staring with an empty, unseeing gaze at the screen, where the cheating wife and her lover continued their wild copulation. His lower lip protruded and sank down, like that of an undeservedly offended boy. His jaw trembled slightly, and tears welled up in his eyes. After pausing for a few minutes until the recording ended, Chuck sighed, turned off the camera, and disconnected it from the laptop. He pulled out the video memory card that was inserted into the laptop and handed it to Tom. "I'm so sorry, cousin. I hope it until the end that I was wrong about here." Not knowing what else to say, Chuck gently patted his cousin on the back, who continued to sit motionless, grabbed his things and left his office, carefully closing the door behind him. On the other side of town, Brad sat in his office, absent-mindedly staring out the window, talking on the phone. "Yeah, dude. She said she decided to get out of our deal. She wants to surprise Tom. Well, she's sort of planning a trip to Hawaii with him and plans for him to knock her up while they're tumbling around there." Brad grimaced as if he had a toothache and kicked the leg of his desk in irritation. "Yeah, I tried, buddy, but she's already made up her mind. I think she will tell you more about this herself next week when you see her." "Yeah, well, go ahead and try to dissuade her yourself." "Okay, Tim. I got you. See you later." "Your mother!" He barked irritably, hitting the table with his fist. Brad knew that over these months he had become firmly hooked on regular sex with Amy. Not that it was some kind of love. No, rather a habit, very pleasant and requiring constant repetition. It didn't bother him at all that he had to pay for sex with her. At least he could enjoy the availability of this sexy, young married woman's body. Moreover, he knew for sure that for a ridiculous $200, not a single professional woman of easy virtue would agree to give up her ass for fucking, and even without a rubber band, which he managed to quite easily persuade Amy to do. So this business of hers was a very profitable investment for Brad and his friends, until recently. Returning to Brad's house that morning, Marjorie, the housekeeper, began unpacking the bedding in the master bedroom. The woman, of course, noticed abundant fresh sperm stains on the sheets. But this was to be expected. They had been there several previous times when she had come to clean the house. One would think that the owners would be embarrassed to leave the bed in such a blatant mess, but no. Marjorie got and laid down fresh sheets, made the bed, and moved on. She tossed the cum-stained sheets into the washing machine, thinking they could be washed while she cleaned the rest of the house. As Tom sat at his desk in the office, his thoughts were running wild, like cockroaches, as he tried to make sense of what he saw on the video. He spent a couple of weeks convincing himself that all his suspicions were just paranoia and that Amy was not for him. Changes. Now harsh reality hit him right in the teeth. Amy cheated on him with his now ex-boyfriend, Brad. Tom's heart was torn apart with pain at the realization that he had been betrayed by both his wife and the man whom he considered his close friend. The shock of this was unbearably terrible. Tom remembered that Amy had never shown any visible interest in Brad, so why would she give in to his advances? There was no common sense in this. However, as he could clearly see from the video recording, she definitely wasn't forced into sex, and she didn't appear to be high on alcohol or drugs, so Tom couldn't find any excuses for his wife. She cheated voluntarily and deliberately. As he sat and tried to figure out what to do next with all this, suddenly, a terrifying thought pierced his brain like lightning. What if she has others? Brad warned me at that party that all my friends were hitting on Amy. What if Brad wasn't the only rat? Damn. Unbearable pictures of how Amy willingly exposes her ass to each of those assholes who constantly hovered around her, got into his head, and began their round dance. In an impotent rage, Tom again slammed his fist on the table, so much so that the mug with half-drunk coffee jumped and toppled over on its side, pouring brown liquid all over his notes and business papers. Tom didn't care about it now. He wanted to scream, stamp his feet and crush the jaws of her lovers, who lied to his face and so skillfully pretended to be friends. When, after a few minutes, the veil of rage that had overwhelmed his mind fell from his eyes, Tom began to think more rationally. He realized that he needed to gather more evidence of his wife's infidelity. Damn, I'm going to need Chuck's help again. Over the next 4 weeks, Chuck, having settled into his role as an undercover detective, collected videotapes of Amy with Tim, Roland, and Frank. Already suspecting the worst, Tom was still completely crushed when he learned for certain that all the guys he once considered friends were happily having sex with his wife. The humiliation was deep and extremely painful, but somehow, incredibly, he managed to pretend, both at home and at work, that everything was fine. During these troubled days, every morning and evening, standing in front of the bathroom mirror and resting his hands on the sink, he looked at his reflection for a long time. You have to pretend that nothing happened and behave naturally, he constantly repeated to himself, like a mantra, while he collected all the irrefutable evidence he needed. Tom arrived home at the usual time, and Amy, who met him, said that she was inviting her husband to dinner at his favorite steakhouse. He was wary, but agreed to the evening out, managing to reliably put a feigned smile on his face. Inviting his wife was an infrequent event in their lives, and during dinner, Tom wondered why she had started all this. When they returned home, Amy sat her husband down on the sofa and laid out travel brochures about Hawaiian attractions in front of him. She excitedly explained how she spent a year saving money from her earnings to pay for a future trip. Beaming with the solemnity of the moment, Amy laid out to Tom all the details of how carefully she had thought through and prepared their trip, and even paid for the tour in full in advance. Finally, she admitted that, secretly from her husband, she called his boss and told him about the surprise, so that Tom's upcoming vacation was already fully approved by his superiors. Tom was a little overwhelmed by all the news about the trip that his wife had thrown at him. They had talked about such a trip many times before, but its high cost forced them to put it on the back burner, at least until the family savings account was replenished to a very substantial amount. Now Amy's eyes sparkled with excitement, and she almost jumped for joy when she told her husband about her plans. "Darling, everything is carefully timed for me. Here, look." She began to bend her fingers. "I'm going off birth control so that when we get to Hawaii, I'll be ovulating according to my cycle. We will make love twice a day, and I will return home already pregnant with our child. Really, it will be great. Isn't that the most romantic thing you've ever heard?" Amy, pleased, almost clapped her hands, smiling widely, and at the same time clearly proud of how wonderfully she had organized everything. Tom thought for a moment, mentally analyzing his own plans, and then, clapping his hands, he turned to his wife, who was impatiently awaiting his answer. "A wonderful surprise, my dear. I think your plan will work just fine for the two of us." Amy squealed in delight and jumped into her husband's lap, pushing him onto the couch. Holding him tightly in her arms, she kissed him and immediately slid to the floor and dragged him into the bedroom. "I'm so glad, honey. Come on, let's quickly go and practice making babies." Tom assumed that she was still safe to conceive at that point, and he also knew that it would be very strange for him to refuse her insistent offer of sex at such a moment. As usual, he had to keep things natural for the time being, so that evening Tom had sex with her twice before he allowed himself to drift off to sleep. Sally Hawk, the divorce lawyer Tom contacted, watched the videos he and Chuck had collected and listened to his request. "So you want her to be served with divorce papers at the airport and have these videos delivered to 4 wives at the same time that your wife's boyfriends are getting bogus lawsuits for alienation of affection?" Sally asked, tapping her pen on the smooth, polished surface of the table. "Exactly." Tom nodded in agreement. "They will all gather at the airport for a big party to see Amy and I off on our trip. I arranged for a limousine to pick them up and take all 4 couples to the airport. In addition, we have already reserved tables in the waiting room, which will be served with a variety of drinks and snacks." Tom grinned with grim vindictiveness. "My additional surprise is a large banner with the inscription, 'Farewell, Now,' which will be deployed as soon as your attendant serves her with the court papers. These fake lawsuits are designed to shock everyone present. But at the same time, I want to add pepper to the carefree lives of these 4 assholes." Sally winced and raised her left hand in a warning gesture. "Stop, stop," she interrupted Tom, who was beginning to boil again. "You shouldn't swear in this office, Mr. Matson, although I of course understand your anger and emotions." The lawyer nodded at him with sympathy. "No one has ever asked me to do this before, but I admit, what you have in mind, this must be a real show." She involuntarily grinned. "When do you want our performer to appear at the airport?" "This must happen at the right moment, the very minute her flight to Hawaii is announced. So the exact time when everything should happen is Saturday at 13 Was. And then came the momentous day when all the deceivers and their unsuspecting spouses gathered in the airport lounge. All of the couple's luggage was pre-checked in for the flight, including some of Amy's additional personal items. She put them in a suitcase that she thought her husband would use while on vacation. Tom watched his watch carefully, glancing at it every now and then, and a few moments before Sally's assistant was supposed to arrive with the papers, he stood up and called everyone to their attention, who were cheerfully chattering and enjoying the delicacies of the guests. "Dear Amy," he turned to his wife, dressed in a bright vacation dress and smiling happily. "You have been the love of my life since we met almost 9 years ago. When you started grooming, I was very proud of the efforts you made. You tried your best and literally busted my ass to turn your small, modest business into a profitable and prosperous enterprise." Tom saw that this ambiguous remark of his caused several malicious grins and cynical winks. which his wife's lovers furtively exchanged. The frozen Amy seemed to have a slightly alarmed look in her eyes at these words, although a wide smile still remained on her face. When you decided to spend all your profits on this wonderful vacation, I was very happy about it. Holding a glass of champagne in his hands, Tom bowed slightly in her direction. So, he raised his voice, I have a small token of gratitude for each of you. And now, while my assistant is handing out gifts, let's all raise our glasses to Amy and wish her a bon voyage. Tom nodded slightly, and a large, beautifully designed banner with this wish unfurled over the heads of those sitting around the table, just as Amy received her envelope and heard Sally's assistant loudly and solemnly announce, "Summons served." Just a second ago, the lively table instantly fell into dead silence. Having managed to notice out of the corner of his eye how, at the sight of the divorce papers, her eyes widened and the smile fell from her instantly pale face, Tom turned to the four stunned wives and said in a contrite voice, "Ladies, I humbly apologize for the perhaps some theatricality of this event, and I wish you all the best." With these words, he put his still unfinished glass on the table, turned, and walked away, just at the moment when the airport informant turned on and announced the start of boarding for Amy's flight. Behind him, chaos erupted as chairs crashed, glasses crashed, and everyone started yelling hysterically at each other. Tom heard Amy scream his name desperately and heartbreakingly, but he never looked back. Because I did everything my lawyer told me to do before the divorce, I didn't talk to Amy until our first meeting in Sally's office. The lawyers argued among themselves for a long time, and today we were going to meet to finally settle everything and put our signatures on the papers. Amy insisted that I agree to a 30-minute one-on-one meeting after all the formalities were completed. I just assumed she wanted a chance to explain why she did what she did that ruined our marriage. As part of her preparatory work before the trial, Sally hired a real private investigator to check Chuck's work. This guy got his money's worth by revealing the details of the financial arrangements my future ex-wife had made with her four-ass renters. It was a real shock for me to find out that she had been cheating on me for almost a year, but the full awareness of this fact helped kill any remaining feelings for Amy that were still simmering somewhere in the depths of my soul. Sally also subsequently told me that Amy never got on the plane to Hawaii that day. Her non-refundable tickets went missing, went unused, and her fully prepaid holiday was canceled without any monetary compensation. When we all gathered at the table negotiations, Amy unsuccessfully tried to talk to me several times, but I ignored her until all the papers were signed. After the lawyers shook hands and left, we were left alone in the office. I sat down at the table opposite her and stared at her intently, encouraging her to start a conversation. She began with difficulty in a quiet, hesitant voice. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. Tom, I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you." Tears appeared in her shining eyes. "But, honey, I still don't understand why you divorced me. What I did meant absolutely nothing. It was just a business agreement, a commercial service, nothing more. You are the only man in my life that I love and the only one I will ever love. For real." Amy leaned forward across the table and tried to take my hands in hers. I sat back in my chair and silently crossed my arms over my chest, continuing to look coldly at my now ex-wife. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and the tone of her voice began to sound pitifully pleading. "Tom, please. We've always had such a good time together. Please, baby. Why can't we just leave this misunderstanding behind? It was just a stupid deal. I raised my hand to stop her. "Amy, I believe you. When you decided to sell yourself to these guys, I know you didn't think much of it. To you, it was the same as if you agreed to let them, I don't know, wash your feet or give you a pedicure, right?" She nodded so hastily and furiously, like a Chinese dummy, that I chuckled internally, as if she wouldn't tear her head off. "It was an intimate sexual act. Oh, sorry, correction. A lot of acts. That didn't really mean anything to anyone. Did I understand everything correctly? Her face, drenched in tears with running mascara and smeared lipstick, instantly brightened and lit up happily. Yes. Oh my God, honey. You finally understood. All this meant nothing to me. I raised my hand again, this time interrupting her wild joy. Yes, Amy. It took me a while to figure it out, but now I fully understand that everything you did was just a business deal. That meant absolutely nothing. To you. Now I raised my voice, pronouncing the words clearly. But the small nuance in this whole business, Amy, is that it meant a lot to me. Let me ask you, Amy, when you made an agreement with them to sell yourself to them, did you really think that I would agree to your deal? She lowered her head, biting her lips and fumbling with the napkin in her white-knuckled hands. Well, that's the problem. Maybe, for you, it didn't mean anything, but you knew for sure that for me this would mean. All but you did it anyway. I stood up, took 2 tattered $100 bills from my back pocket, and threw them on the table in front of Amy. Thank you for giving me your time today. Keep your usual fee. She didn't say anything, just shuddered with her whole body, as if from a slap in the face, and closed her eyes. Her lips trembled, and transparent tears continued to stream from under her clenched eyelashes. The past was over. I turned and left, accompanied by the quiet sobs of a woman who was now a stranger to me. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.